Welcome. This is a training on the STAR interview method, a framework for generating concise responses to behavioral interview questions. By the end of today's training, you will be able to recognize the key components of a STAR response and why each part is important. You will gain confidence in your ability to answer behavioral interview questions using the structured method for responding that is offered with the STAR method. And finally, you will gain access to resources to help you better plan and prepare for future interviews. So what is the STAR method? The STAR method is a framework and structure for concisely responding to behavioral interview questions. Let's break down each element of the framework in more detail to gain a deeper understanding of this framework. The S stands for situation. When responding to a behavioral interview question, you should first explain your situation to the hiring team so that they understand the context of your example. Be concise when doing so, as only 20% of your response should be spent on explaining the situation. Next, you will identify the task, or maybe the problem or challenge that you took responsibility for completing. Another way to think about the task is to consider the goal of your efforts from the situation you just shared. As you can see, only 10% of your response is used to highlight the task, so attempt to express this in one concise sentence. Now you've reached the element of the STAR method that requires the most attention. You should allot 60% of your response time to describing the actions you took to complete the task or reach the goal. Here is where you will highlight the skills, competencies, and character traits addressed in the question. The final element, result, gives you an opportunity to explain the positive outcomes or results of your actions and efforts. As much as you are able, highlight quantifiable results. Similar to the task element, your results should make up only 10% of your response, so make it concise. The goal of this method or format is to keep your storytelling light. Less can be more, so don't gamble with a ramble, but rather lean on the STAR method to concisely demonstrate how you can be a great addition to their team. We just talked about what the STAR method is. Now I'm going to briefly share what it is used for. First and foremost, it was designed to guide responses to behavioral interview questions. However, it can be applied and used for many different things. It can be a template for LinkedIn story content, for creating cover letters, writing conference proposals, applying for leadership development opportunities, and even networking in person. There are so many great ways to apply the STAR method. For now, though, we're going to take a look at the STAR method in practice using a sample interview question. What you see here is a sample behavioral interview question. Tell me about a time when you led by example. What did you do? And how did others react? So let's dive in and apply the STAR method to this question. So, the first step is to lay out the situation. For this step, you want to remember to keep your response concise and relevant while still painting the picture. So, what this sounds like in a response is, both my observations and team feedback indicated that there was a need for increased community building on our team. I observed one team member who had been on the team for 2 years openly admit he only knew the names of 3 other members on our team of 25. So, as you can see, this situation is a team that is in need of some additional team building. So next you need to highlight the task. What is your role in this situation? This helps your audience know where you fit in. This is not where you start sharing what you did, but rather what you were responsible for. So what this sounds like in a response is, as the leader of my team, it was my responsibility to be responsive to this feedback. So now it is time to share how you took action. This is where you want to get specific and describe the activities, strategies, and techniques you used in response to the situation and task you were presented. This provides you with an opportunity to demonstrate your problem-solving skills. What this sounds like in a response is, I started out by naming what I saw and heard in the feedback, as well as by stating my expectations for a collaborative team environment. Next, I worked with the team to determine how they wanted to build team through a survey and asked who would be willing to take the lead in supporting the initiative through subcommittees. For example, we had a retreat committee to plan an annual retreat for the team, a social committee to plan quarterly social events, and a birthday committee who would recognize and celebrate individuals at our monthly team meetings. Once establishing the events based on those requests, I then created the space for the community building activities to occur. I worked team building activities and birthday celebrations into every meeting and mapped out time for the retreat. While social events were optional, they were shared widely on team events calendar at each meeting. All right, so that was the action, and now it's time to discuss the results. Here is where you will highlight the positive aspects of the lessons learned and emphasize the relevance and importance of your actions. When possible, remember to quantify the results using numbers and data. So let's look at what this sounds like in a response. As a result of these efforts, I was able to increase collaboration and resource sharing among team members and improve employee satisfaction and retention. My one team member was actually able to name every team member after 6 months of proactive team building. This was critical because the work we did was extremely emotionally taxing, and communities of support are essential for long-term sustainability in the work. Most importantly, I learned the importance of demonstrating care and creating space for feedback on employee wellness, engagement, and persistence. When you care about people, they tend to care more about the work. All right, to summarize this, let's take a look at the response when pulled all together. Here's the interview question again. Tell me about a time when you led by example. What did you do and how did others react? Here's the response put all together. Both my observations and team feedback indicated that there was a need for increased community building on our team. I observed one team member who had been on the team for 2 years openly admit he only knew the names of 3 other members on our team of 25. As the leader of my team, it was my responsibility to be responsive to this feedback. I started by naming what I saw and what I heard in the feedback, as well as stating my expectations for a collaborative team environment. Next, I worked with the team to determine how they wanted to build team through a survey and asked who would be willing to take the lead in supporting the initiative through subcommittees. For example, we had a retreat committee to plan an annual retreat for the team, a social committee to plan quarterly social events, and a birthday committee who would recognize and celebrate individuals at our monthly team meetings. Once establishing the events based on requests, I then created the space for the community building activities to occur. I worked team building activities and birthday celebrations into every meeting and mapped out time for the retreat. While social events were optional, they were shared widely on a team events calendar at each meeting. As a result of all these efforts, I was able to increase collaboration and resource sharing among team members and improve employee satisfaction and retention. My one team member was actually able to name every team member after 6 months of proactive team building. Additionally, I learned the importance of demonstrating care and creating space for feedback on employee wellness, engagement, and persistence. When you care about people, they tend to care more about the work. Okay, now that I've discussed what the STAR method is and walked you through the STAR method in action, I'm going to provide some key tips when using the STAR method. First, focus on I. When describing your actions, clearly state what you did. Next, be specific. Provide details and avoid generalizing. Be sure to emphasize the positive results, show the impact of your efforts, and highlight your accomplishments. Be honest. Don't embellish or omit important parts of the story. And don't assume. Always share your experience, assuming no one has previous knowledge of your work. This is especially important if you are interviewing for an internal role. So, you've learned the ins and outs of the STAR method, and now it's time for you to practice your storytelling. Use your own job experience and what you've learned in this training to answer some of these prompts. Think about a time you solved a problem, when you overcame a challenge, a time you made a mistake, when you worked as a leader, a time when you worked with a team, and when you did something interesting. Each of these scenarios will allow you to practice common concepts that you are likely to face in an interview. So get creative with how and when to use these stories. If you want to take your preparation one step further, use this STAR method interview prep template. I have pre-populated some anticipated broad categories or themes for potential interview questions. Using the template to walk through the STAR method for each category will provide you with an opportunity to pre-think and plan out your responses or examples for the various categories. Feel free to add additional categories. I would encourage you to consider specific subject matter expert categories linked directly to the role you are applying for. While practicing with a partner is not an option in a virtual training environment, feel free to use the resources provided and connect with a trusted colleague to practice on your own time in preparation for any future interviews. To wrap up today, I wanted to share some resources with you. Attached here, you will find a YouTube video that explains the STAR method in case you want a quick refresher, 30 sample behavioral interview questions, the STAR method interview prep template, a link to the Grow with Google interview warm-up if you want some real-time practice answering interview questions, and a link to the Student Affairs Professional Development Google site. This recording, along with the slide deck and the STAR method interview prep template, will be accessible on the Student Affairs Professional Development Google site. Thank you for your time and interest in the STAR method. Happy interviewing.